Morning, welcome, and thanks for joining us this morning for a discussion of an important new book, God's Resistance, Mobilizing Faith to Defend Immigrants, which came out this past fall. If you're joining us online, comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and at the end you'll have time to give comments and questions. We have a few people in person here just to keep this ball rolling a little bit. The author, we have a panel of 3 of the 4 authors, and Manuel Pastor, USC professor, will be leading the discussion. Sorry, I am like everybody else apparently at the tail end of some weird cough thing. And if I just like in a minute, you'll know why. This book I think is important for several reasons that will become apparent throughout the conversation. But I just want to highlight 2 that directly relate to our work here at the USC Center for Religion and Civic Culture. The mission at CRCC is twofold. First is to further the understanding of religion in society. And second, to support faith and community leaders to become full partners in the work of what we call positive social change, because social change can go in different directions. This book fits exactly with that mission. First, the book tells a story and provides an explanatory framework on how different religious groups are enacting their faith in service to others, as we say at CRCC and channeling Reverend Chip Murray, beyond the walls of their congregations to bring about positive social change. Thus, it provides a way to understand the continued importance of religion in society as it confronts a particular social, political, and human issue. Second, this book is incredibly timely. Although when I reviewed the proposal and then the manuscript prior to publication, one thought in my mind was that the organizations detailed in the book rose to a particular challenge at a particular point in time of draconian immigration policies put forth by a nakedly nationalist and discriminatory administration. You can read between the lines whatever you want, but you'll know what I'm saying. But if you've paid any attention to the news in the past couple of weeks, such as at the State of the Union address, or more precisely, the response to the State of the Union address by Katie Britt, or to new immigration laws about to go into effect in Texas, that moment in time continues. This book then can provide ideas and resources for other faith leaders and communities to again rise to the challenge that we surely all will be facing. One last point, and this is about the importance of religion in society. And I have to say this because I direct the center. But I think it's true, and I think the majority of media and much scholarly attention over the last several years has focused on religious decline and disaffiliation, the so-called religious nuns. But what this focus misses is, however important it might be, is the continuing institutional power of religion, despite the decline in individuals who are believing or attending or identifying with a particular religious group. And let's face it, most of the current momentum and the power is coming from the religious right and its vast network of institutions. And if you're interested in that topic, at noon, not on this channel, but there's another book talk out of, I think, Annenberg about Reagan and the rise of the religious right. You might want to tune that in. But there's another, which is another, the strength of these institutions, which have been being built for the past 50, 60 years, is another reason why this book is important, because there's another religion story, this religion story in society that can be enacted and explained, and this book is an excellent way to enter that story. So hopefully that gets you a little bit primed for today's conversation, and I'm very happy to have our panel here today. I'm going to introduce, we have 3, like I said, we have 3 of the 4 authors of the book here in person, so we have, starting kind of left direction. These are all people that CRCC has known and worked with over the last long time. I've been here almost 20 years, and I've known each of these members in different contexts, working with them. Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra is the academic dean of the Central Latino and associate professor of mission and global transformation at Fuller Theological Seminary. By the way, when I read that, I was like, that is a large charge.
It's a little nuts, like Jesus says it had charge into global transformation.
Global transformation. I'm glad it's you. Alexia is the co-author of Faith-Rooted Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World, as well as Buried Seeds, learning from the vibrant resiliency of marginalized Christian communities. She's been a scholar practitioner in the arena of engaging faith communities and social transformation for over 40 years, including as co-founder of the New Sanctuary Movement and Evangelical Immigration Table. She has received numerous awards, including the Changemaker Award from Liberty Hill Foundation and the Prime Movers Fellowship from the Hunt Alternatives Fund. Next to her on her right, to your left, do that. Brad Christerson, just turned page, even though I know Brad, is a professor of sociology at Biola University and an affiliate at the Center here at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture. He has written extensively in the areas of globalization, race, religion, and inequality, and he's the author of The Rise of Network Christianity, which, by the way, all the people that managed to get into Trump's cabinet in 2016, but we finished that book before he was alive. So that's a good background. Just another book plug. Growing up in America, the power of race in the lives of teens, and against all odds, a struggle for racial integration in religious organizations. And he's also a good friend and surfing buddy and outside of the office conversation person at our office, away from the office, if you get my drift. And Nancy Wang Yuen is a sociologist and pop culture expert and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant for Peopleism. She is the author of Real Inequality, Hollywood Actors and Racism, and is a guest writer on CNN, Elle, LA Times, Newsweek, and Vanity Fair. And get on X from on Twitter, and you can find Nancy all over the place. So I'm surprised you're not live tweeting.
I am. I got my phone.
Is it tweeting now with X? Xing it?
It's.
Called posting.
Posting. There.
I still call it Twitter.
And then leading our conversation today is Professor Manuel Pastor. Dr. Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity here at USC, and he currently directs the Equity Research Institute at USC. Pastor holds an economics PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is the inaugural holder of the Terpangian Chair in Civil Society and Social Change. Pastor's research has generally focused on issues of economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities and the social movement seeking to change those realities. His most recent books are Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter, and South Central Dreams. I have this one. Finding Home and Building Community in South LA. Both of those were published in 2020. Finally, before I turn this over to Manuel, just a couple of logistics. We'll go for about an hour of this conversation. Wherever it goes is where it's going to go. And then we'll have time for about 30 minutes or so for broader conversation, both from in person, in our studio, as we like to call it, and people online. So, Manuel?
Great, thank you very much. Excited to be with you today. You were discussing how you have a bit of a cough. I want to let folks know, people who know me, know that I've had a bit of a voice issue. It comes from a condition that's called spasmodic dysphonia, spasms around the voice box, which, by the way, is the condition that Robert Kennedy Jr. has. If you've listened to him, you know how scratchy his voice is. If I was not treated, I would sound like him. I would not be as delusional as he is, but my voice would sound like him. The way it gets treated is actually with Botox, which is why I'm remarkably so well preserved. I like to understand how come you're so well preserved. That does mean that my voice might be soft. So please, if you're in the immediate audience and you want me to project, just pray. It ain't gonna happen. So I'm going to ask a couple questions to kind of get this conversation going. I do want to acknowledge that this is a group of very experienced speakers, which means that pretty much no matter what question I ask, they already have something they want to say. So this will be really just a bit of an excuse to get the conversation going and some of what I know that I want to explore. And one of the things I wanted to start with is sort of what's the origins of the book? Why write this book? What was it trying to address? And I know Alexia will talk a little bit about the pre-origins, that is stuff that came before the book that's not even in the book. But Brad, do you want to start on the origins of the book?
Yeah, I will. And I guess the origins start with the 2016 election. And a number of us, because of the rhetoric, obviously, that was out there and Donald Trump winning the presidency, we were worried and disturbed about what might happen, particularly to immigrant communities. And so I think the election was on Tuesday, and I think on the following Sunday, a number of us met, and I had been connected to Alexia and Chao Romero and some others, and we met in this small house near downtown LA, and we're just like, what are we gonna do when all this starts happening? And so fast forward, long story short, I got involved in this, which I hadn't been involved in before, this network of faith-based activists doing immigration advocacy work, and which Alexia has been doing for 40 years, and she was leading the charge, and along with some others, and that experience was amazing. Just seeing the power of faith to advocate for folks, and this is a kind of a movement that doesn't get a lot of press. And for me, it was life-changing to see people of faith on the ground in this grassroots movement, protecting people and putting their bodies on the line, putting their lives on the line to advocate for people. And so we thought this was another thing. So doing this work for a number of years, we learned a lot. And what works, what doesn't, what are the obstacles, what are some of the principles of organizing that we thought that other people would benefit from. And so we have an amazing group of case studies, 6 different case studies of faith-based organizations advocating for immigrants. 1 Catholic, 1 mainline Protestant, 2 evangelical, and 2 multi-faith organizations. And so we just thought this is a story that needs to be told, first to highlight the power of faith in this movement that doesn't get a lot of press, but also just some practical knowledge that someone like Alexia has had 40 years of doing this work that other people could benefit from.
Alexia, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe by the way, I'm struck by this because that was my reaction to Trump got elected was, I need to write a book. And, our fifth book was State of Resistance, which I think Alexia knows well, which was about the kind of rise of movement organizing in Los Angeles and in California. And we'll come back to it because I want to think a little bit about the intersection between faith-based organizing and other kind of organizing, but we'll get there. Can you talk a little bit about the pre-origins of the book and maybe why you decided to jump into writing this as well?
Sure. And so I need to tell a story. It's a little bit of a complicated story. I'm going to try to move through it quickly, but not
Alexia's going to tell a story.
not lose the carne, not lose the meat in the story, in the process. So I have to start a decade before where Brad just started. I have to start with 2006. Does anybody remember the huge demonstrations that happened in 2006? That were a response to Sensenbrenner. That Sensenbrenner, I think, woke a lot of people up because it would have made it a felony not only to be undocumented, but to help or serve an undocumented person. And people in churches just woke up and said, woo, we need to respond. And Hispanic pastors, Latina pastors in Southern California responded, and leaders in churches, and came out and got engaged. And we really thought we would win. I mean, we thought at least we would win on a certain level. There was a proposal for immigration reform that was Ted Kennedy and John McCain. It was bipartisan. It polled at 75%. So we thought, oh, we're going to win that. And, even if we don't win that, we'll win the DREAM Act. At that point, I was polling at 90%. And then we didn't win. And so we stepped back, a number of us, and we began to do an analysis where we said, that's 75% who said we want a better immigration system, didn't care. They had no passion about it. They looked at the proposal and they went, well, this looks good, but it doesn't matter to us. And the people who were anti-immigrant felt very passionate and they called all the time. And immigrants didn't feel a lot of hope Why would we ever call our legislators? We don't think they'd ever listen to us. So we started in our analysis saying what's going to be critical is to bring people together on common sacred ground and have the exchange of passion and hope. That if non-immigrants realize that we are one body in the body of Christ with people that are being directly affected, then there will be passion. You know, what is the one institution in our society mandated to care passionately about people that are not us? That's a Sunday school question, right? And then immigrants would see that we're not alone and people would get hope. So we said, oh, we need the exchange of passion and hope. And then we had some bad news, which is a number of the Latina pastors that we knew who had get engaged were starting to say, oh, we shouldn't do this anymore. We lost, God is not in this. So we panicked. And you can't have the exchange of passion and hope without immigrant leaders. And so we got a number initially of Hispanic pastors together in Orange County. And Danny De Leon was there, and he was the pastor of Templo Calvario, the founding pastor, 10,000 immigrants. And we laid out this vision of the exchange of passion and hope. We laid out this vision of what we were going to be able to do to make a difference. And there were a bunch of pastors in the room. And Danny said, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. He said, I play golf with these people. They are never going to care about us. And everybody starts packing up. And so I felt the Holy Spirit, which I'm just going to leave there. I'm just going to say it. And I stood up and I said to Danny, is anything impossible for God? And it was a moment where nobody breathed. And then Danny laughed. And he said, well, let's try. Nothing is impossible for God. Let's try. So we got together a meeting in Costa Mesa, which was one of the first places in the country to involve local law enforcement in immigration law. So that's how conservative it was. It was also a seat of evangelical thought leadership. We organized a breakfast, a pastor's breakfast, with 26 Latina immigrant pastors and 26 white pastors. And then Dave Gibson walked in, who's Korean American. He didn't quite fit, but we welcomed him. New song, 11,000 members. He walked in. And we started to share. And your father stood up and told the story, Rene Molina Sr., of how he came to this country, and he came undocumented, but he believed he was sent like Abraham. And then a white pastor got up and spoke about how he had and I'm not going to give the whole long story, I'm already running out of time for this long story, but how he had preached in his congregation about this issue and lost 200 families. And he said, I feel with you, Rene, but I'm scared. And some of the Hispanic pastors said, you think you're scared right now? And then Juan Martinez, who was my predecessor at Central Latino, stood up, and he's 6 foot something, and he said to everyone, we're scared. He said, are we the people who carry the cross? Do we live by fear, or do we live by faith? And again, it was a moment where no one breathed. And then people started saying, well, how do we do this? How do we do it? And so we developed something called the Our Children Project, or Nuestros Hijos, which was leaders from immigrant congregations and non-immigrant congregations going together to visit children in a children's detention center doing prison visitation. And in that process, we could train people. We could introduce them to scripture. We could introduce them to immigration history. We had a whole plan for how it was going to build out, but God had other plans. The head of the church council at Mariners, 21,000 members at the time, mostly white, mostly Republican, was part of the project. He was going with a leader from Templo Calvario, who was leading their council. They had a young man that they were ministering to. He got deported. And we really believed that he would die when he was deported. And this head of the council was a business leader, very wealthy, walked into the pastor's office, senior pastor's office, and said, we have to do something about this now. And that led to a coalition called Welcoming the Stranger in Orange County, which had actually Saddleback in it. It had all of the major it was huge. And then I don't have any more time right now, but that was one of the three major streams that created the evangelical immigration table, which, if you read the book, had a key role in Obama's declaration of DACA. So just how the process, I wanted you to get a sense of that, because we talk in the book about the role of the faith community in inspiration, in bridging, and in empowering. I wanted to put flesh on the bones, that's what it looks like on the ground. And I have a million more stories, but I'm not going to spend all the time. But there's a lot of those stories are in the book.
I bet the idea that God thinks nothing is impossible, or with God nothing is impossible, probably also pertains to writing the book. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about either, for you, what were the origins of the book, or really how did you come to this? Why did this move you to say, I want to be a part of this effort?
Yeah, so I came at it also similar to what Brad said. The election happened. The rhetoric that was being said as part of a campaign felt like, wow, this is like hate speech, right? The way that Donald Trump talked about immigrants. I just couldn't even believe. I thought, oh, he's never going to get, become the Republican candidate. And then, of course, he moves up and then he becomes president. And I felt like that kind of hate, as I watched it become policy, when I think it was at Union Church, there was this is post what they were talking about when, and this was back in 2016 as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so maybe was it November? It was like almost immediately December, immediately after the election. And so all these people gathered and to talk about what are we going to do. And I felt personally, I'm an immigrant myself. I came when I was 5, naturalized citizen, and just feeling like this is the human rights issue of our time. That as a person of faith, as well as just a sociologist and just a human being and citizen of this country, that I can't, if I sit back and do nothing, then am I just like the people in Nazi Germany that were just bystanders, And so, and then hearing what, and I think that exactly what Alexia was saying in terms of her story of nothing's impossible with God, right? And bringing people, so I think in our book, we talk about how faith can bring people of totally different backgrounds that would never be at a dinner table together, But because we all have that shared faith and shared identity as Christians, and if you're, I don't want to say truly Christian, but if you really care about the oppressed as a Christian, I guess there's different types of Christians, which is just insane to me, which is, I don't think that that's true, but apparently our country is showing, and especially everything we talked about, like Dick talked about, the kind of Christian right, and where I guess I think of myself as Christian left, but I just feel like Christian of, the Bible, but anyway, but I think that just feeling like this is the human rights issue of our time, and that as a person of faith, I need something more to push me into action, because as we all know, organizing you can be totally burnt out, right? And I think that in our book, we really try to show that faith can continue to push you and refresh you and hopefully rejuvenate you. And I think when I joined Matthew 25, Mateo 25, which is one of the organizations in our book that also we were all part of, there were actually sessions about how to support activists, right? Through prayer. Prayer was big. So prayer is another way, I think, for people to come together in a meditative, in a way where we are all kind of remembering what it is that we believe in and what it is that we want to accomplish in this world, and where do we draw our strength from, right? And if you're not religious, I mean, just being with one another, right? Having that support, seeing that there's other people, especially people that don't look like you. And I think for the white folks that came, just seeing the people that are suffering to develop that empathy, all that, I think we saw that in action. And I think writing the book was really about letting people know what is happening and what's possible. And again, that not all people of faith hate immigrants, and having them kind of, I don't know, just just completely dominate the conversation in that way, that's also very discouraging, right? Because it feels like, oh, me and people that I commune with it's like we don't exist. But I mean, the entire civil rights movement was, propelled by people of faith. So this country, it's not like that hasn't happened. And of course, Alexia's long history of organizing the sanctuary movement. I think people, the United States is really bad at history. So we do have historical stuff too, right? Because people don't remember what life was just like 10 years ago. And people don't, and literally we have policies that are banning history from being taught because it's somehow DEI or CRT, whatever they want to, fabricate. And so there's a moral, I think, impediment? No,
Imperative.
It's a moral impediment that we're trying to fight. Yes, but we were propelled to write this as sociologists, as researchers, but also as people who just care that the world should know this information and that other activists can have some sort of model so they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
There's so much in what all of you said. I wanted to kind of think a little bit about the book itself. And I wanted to ask a question that's the following. So one thing I really like about this book, aside from telling a great history and highlighting things that people don't pay attention to, and talk a lot about accompaniment and advocacy and education. Hope you talk a little bit about all of that. One thing I really like about this book is that you don't argue against anyone. Most academic books, we spend a lot of time arguing like why your theory is really bad. And, that's about half the book, right?
Yes.
And you don't do it, and I really like it. And despite that, I want to ask you, what are you arguing against? That is, in a way, you're arguing against, obviously, a limited interpretation of Christianity and spirituality. I think you're also, in a way, arguing against the idea of doing social movement theory without considering faith and values. There's a lot that's subtly there where you're really pushing sort of the literature and the theory in unspoken ways. So did that come up for you? Were you kind of aware of what you were pushing against? Brad, you're nodding a lot, which means either you're either uncomfortable or ready to answer this question.
I'm just being supported. like everything you're saying. Yeah, I'll take that on. So, one of the things that we're arguing against is, first of all, is this idea that faith and politics, and particularly Christian involvement with politics, means sort of Republican right-wing sort of movements that we see that get most of the press. And so that's one, we're showing, that it's a much more complicated story than that. Another thing that I guess we're arguing against is that, that faith, that social movements in this country, including this one going on right now, tend to be secular, or especially progressive movements for social change, because there's just a lot of faith, and you don't see it, I think, unless you're in it on the grassroots. The labor movement, both in the past and currently, there's just so much faith, that it's everywhere. And it's just not the sort of dominant faith that has historically been sort of in charge in this country. So I think those are at least two things that we're arguing against. I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to let Nancy address that too, but that made me have often talked about how people don't really come to progressive politics because they took a great course on Marxist economics as an undergraduate. I mean, maybe if you took my course on Marxist economics, but mostly we come to it because there was some deep hurt or trauma that impacted us or impacted an ally or a friend or a family member. And it's our soul that brings us to this work. And how do we combine then soul and strategy? Nancy, and then I want to go to Alexia. When you think about what you're arguing for and what you're arguing against in this book, what comes to mind?
Oh gosh, I'm trained as an ethnographer, so it's just members' meanings, right? Really honoring that rather than thinking about, I mean, I'm not a religious scholar, so that is Brad's category. But I think we really treated this book as honoring the stories of the people we interviewed. And I think that the ethnographic kind of tradition is just to, like, that's enough, right? That these people's lives are valuable and they're relevant. And of course, knowing that the kind, I think, again, we weren't thinking, I was like, actually, let's not even publish it with a university press. Let's get it through a trade press and get it to a wider audience, because my desire is for this to have social impact. Not that academic books don't have social impact, but a lot of times they are just speaking to, you know, the ivory tower, which is totally not why I became a sociologist. So I think that does it matter who we're arguing against or for? Because the general public, like what Brad said, they just think of Christians and Trump. Like that is, and even at the university. So I used to teach at Biola University, and it is this assumption within evangelicalism, for example, that you have to be conservative and Republican, right? And then I felt like, well, that's not me, and yet I think I share the same faith as you. So it was a personal, I think, you talk about trauma. I felt like just existing as a Christian in this time is traumatic, right? Because there seems to be, like, we're at war with one another, right? And yet we claim to be Christians, and yet I can't understand, like, why someone would feel the opposite of me when I feel like this is why I even still have faith, right? Like, faith for me gives me a moral compass, and the morality feels like there's people that feels like they're evil, and yet they claim the same faith. So the trauma of, so even just for me, interviewing the folks that are on the ground, the people that are the refugees and asylum seekers that are experiencing, you know, great oppression and yet still have faith, right? And also want and are being supported by people with faith and experiencing healing and also just having material needs met, right? To me, that's what I wanted to see, and that's what I wanted to document. It doesn't really matter to me what the academics say, because these are people's lives and their stories, and they matter. So
That's an argument against a particular version of the academy.
Yes.
That's very powerful.
So actually, I want to actually build on that. So I just came back from the Society for Pentecostal Studies. So these are academics, but they're a particular brand of academics. They're academics that are trusted by the Pentecostal church. And yet their view often of the academic world is old. Let's put it that way. It's true. It's quite traditional. They're trying to prove that they have academic chops, and that means things like ethnography are suspect. You know, they're talking about theology, and yet they have trusted relationships with people that are completely caught up in the wave of anti-immigrant sentiment. So I felt like, what an important group to speak to, and what an important group to challenge in terms of their fidelity to this bloodless, not incarnate understanding of academia. Because I needed them to face not just the pain or the heroism or the faith of immigrants, but the hidden reasons why people are part of the anti-immigrant movement, and those hidden reasons from a spiritual perspective. So when you talk about what we're writing against, that I was talking about the older brother in the story of the prodigal son, one of the presentations I gave. In the story of the prodigal son, the older brother is outraged because the younger brother has wasted his half of the inheritance, and the father still welcomes him when he comes home and kills the fatted calf and has a party for him. And the older brother says, this is not fair. This is not his, this is mine. And you are giving it to him. This is not fair. And I said, you know, the older brother might sound from the surface like he's got a good point. But underneath, this is about fear and greed, this outrage. And I had man, a white Southern man who runs a Pentecostal denomination, come up to me afterwards and say, you changed my life today. I didn't know. I didn't think. I didn't realize. I feel like the stories in the book and the whole way that the book is written from this ethnographic perspective is part of what I carried into the room as I spoke. I'm fairly new to the academic world and still understanding, what people believe and why they believe it and what this endeavor is about and how do you speak to it. But I really feel like there are various lies that the book speaks to on multiple levels. And that all those lies need to be spoken to right now. That Jesus said that the truth will set us free. And I think that at this moment in history, that's a critical task.
So I want to talk about another thing that comes up in the book, which I think it's great that it's in the book, is the complexity of these Latino Hispanic evangelical leaders who, on the one hand, may have quite an open heart around immigrants, but they're reluctant to criticize their conservative president or to somehow take away from a right-wing movement that they feel protects life by resisting reproductive rights, that protects what they talk or view from their perspective as religious liberty. And that's salient right now because one of the things we're seeing over the last couple of years is this shift within the Latino population in particular toward being much more open to Trump. And, I think it was kind of easy to deny that maybe in 2020 because the evidence was kind of thin and it seemed like it was mostly, folks who might be in the Border Patrol in Texas or Cubans in Miami, and who knows about them anyway, right? But, there's a real shift that's going on within the Latino population. I think there's some reasons for it that I can kind of get to it. And there was a story the other day about an undocumented resident who's been around for 30 years and sees these new asylum seekers. It's like, well, why are they getting help, right? When I didn't get any, right? So there's a complexity there about the fact that it's not just the white Christian, pro-Republican evangelicals who you think are not on your side. There's also this complexity within these Hispanic congregations as well.
I just want to say one thing to start with. I could still add, but they have a lot to say about it too. I just want to say that when after another presentation, the big presentation that I did, there was actually an African American leader who stood up and said, I'm really torn in this election because I want to vote for the right to life. The Democrats seem to be identifying themselves primarily around the issue of right to own abortion. And he said, and I really want to stand for the right to life. And everywhere I'm hearing in my circles that this is the issue that matters, is the unborn. And he said, what would you say to that? And I said, my immediate response is that we are, as leaders, called to preach the whole Bible, not just one concern or one issue. And I had a lot of support for that, but he came up to me afterwards and he said, you didn't answer my question. He wanted me to tell him who to vote for. And so I'm saying that to just underline, because I think you are actually combining, Manuel, two of the main issues. And one of them does have to do with the real anguish of many Hispanics around that particular issue, that, we find God in children in a very powerful way. And so the whole abortion issue is just anguish for us. And then for many of us, I can hear my daughter's voice on the arguments that we've had on this, but for many of us, this is just really hard. And then I think the story that you told is also very real, is that even when you parse 2020, if you look at attitudes towards immigration, it's one thing. If you look at dreamers versus asylum seekers, it's quite different, the picture. Is that many of the people who've been here many years identify closely with dreamers. I don't identify closely with asylum seekers.
Yeah.
And so that's something that people have used as a wedge very intentionally and has real power. I was literally picked up by an Uber driver who's a Pentecostal Christian who's Hispanic yesterday, who was saying to me, you know, those Venezuelans, they're terrible. They're criminals. They're horrible people. And they're representing Nicolas Maduro. I was like, no, they're actually fleeing. No, but, you know, they're sent as spies. You know, this story, right? But of course, she said at the end, and I want to underline this, pero son seres humanos. Like, they're human beings.
Yeah.
You know, she couldn't see them as other, but there was all of this rhetoric that had crept in there, all of it just powerful. So then I want to...
Before going on, I mean, just to put a data point on this, and about the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States, its previous peak was 2007. It fell pretty dramatically between 2007 and 2009 as a result of the Great Recession. It's been kind of tapering downward ever since. Through the Obama years, through the Trump years, there was no increase in the number, in the decline. And that decline had to do with a lot of folks, those people crossing the border to come to the United States, which meant that more and more the median length of time in country for undocumented steadily went up, right? So that at this, like about 2 years ago, about 2/3 of all undocumented immigrants in California had been in the state for longer than a decade. And so that's a very different kind of argument about how do you protect families who are here, deport somebody who's deeply enmeshed in the community, than what the feelings are around asylum seekers and the big influx at the border. So it's partly politics, and it's actually also partly the nature of the phenomena we're looking at is a little bit different on the ground as well. But can you talk a little bit about the complexity that you tried to represent in the book? Sometimes authors move right past that complexity. I think if you're an ethnographer, you don't. But sometimes people move right past it because it's politically inconvenient, right? That they're not like totally revolutionary, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, since we're ethnographers and storytellers, I want to tell a couple stories. So I'll keep it quick. One was this pastor, who's a pastor and sort of deeply enmeshed in his community, who when Trump took office, actually got detained, and because he's undocumented. And talking to this pastor a number of times, he said, "Well, you know, if I was able to vote, I would vote for Trump." And because of the life issue, the pro-life issue. And that was a shocker for me. The person that was responsible for putting you in this horrific place, and he had, you know, been here for 20 some years and went through a lot of trauma. But no, I would vote. And so, yeah, there's no getting around that. Now, part of that too is not just this sort of bullet point issue of abortion, but he was deeply enmeshed in a religious culture that's very conservative and Republican. So how do we, because of, he's part of I'll just say Assemblies of God, which is a, you know, it goes all the way back to the Azusa Street Revival. It sort of grew out of that. That was the white denomination that came out of that movement. And then the Church of God in Christ was the, you know, they became segregated. But you can't separate his attitudes from his enmeshment in that religious culture too. So I think it's not just something about being Latino makes you sort of conservative on that issue. The other story I wanted to tell was, so a number of us got invited to this, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez had a dialogue with faith leaders, and she's in my district. And so we had done some advocacy work with her, and so she invited me and some other faith leaders to her office to talk about, hey, how can we move on this issue of immigration reform? How can we protect people? This was during the Trump years, and she invited some prominent Latino pastors from her district to come in, and to her surprise, they were sort of angrily telling her, "How are you going to stop the illegals from coming here?" And can we just put the military down on the border of, Mexico and El Salvador? And so, actually, I'm not sure if they share a border. I'm bad at geography. But that's what they were saying. And so that was a shocker for me and for her. It's like, wow, I thought, because she had contact with the faith leaders that were sort of pro-immigration reform.
Yeah.
And so I just think, so it's the religious culture part, but I also think that the political culture of this is a wedge issue. And the Republican Party is just so good at using this as a wedge issue that it doesn't matter even if you have an immigrant past. Another quick story, we had a pastor who, in the book that we tell the story, he has a congregation of mostly immigrants. And when he went through the Fuller Seminary's Diplomato program and started preaching about immigration and, we need to protect these people and getting fired up about it, and he lost 40% of his congregation. And this was mostly immigrant folks. And so these were like surprises to me. But I think it just speaks to the power of this rhetoric out there that's dehumanizing people and using it as a wedge issue to sort of advance people's political career.
I just say that in the Diplomado, which is a 6-month online professional certificate program in Spanish or in English, you can take it in either, that people do go through this profound theological formation that does change them. And in that changing process, there's often tears because something falls from their eyes and they're able to be true to their experience. So I feel like I just want to say that people do get caught up in a group think, right? They get caught up in a group think and they get very scared of departing from that, because if you already feel like an outsider, you already feel like you don't belong, you already feel criticized and disparaged, you hold on to the group think as a refuge, as a safe place to stand. And so it's hard to let go of it, but then if you're enabled by a different kind of formation to let go of it, there's a deep relief, because there's an inner integrity that happens in people where I can stand with somebody who's suffering unjustly, and my heart wants to do that. My Jesus poured love poured out in me, love of Christ wants to do that, right? So I just needed to say that, sort of counterposing, that those forces are there. And I think we tried in the book to show that, right?
Yeah, and then there are costs to finding that integrity, which is what you're putting.
Can I add something
Yes.
about
No, I really
immigrants?
wanna ask.
So I think that immigrants come to this country in order to succeed. And part of that success is assimilating into dominant culture. And dominant culture says, we don't want you here. So it's like, oh, you don't want me here, but now I'm here. But now I can sound like you and say, whatever. Then I'm assimilating into dominant culture, and there's some benefits to that, right? Like, oh, I'm not like them. So it's a way to protect oneself, right? So it's a survival technique, right? And it's not just immigrants. I mean, we talk about white adjacency, right? If you're white adjacent, then as a person of color, you get all these benefits. Obviously, you're acting often against your group interest, and this is how white supremacy works, right? In order to get all the people of color, work against their interests, work against coming together and supporting and actually even promoting what dominant culture, what benefits, right? And so I mean, I feel like I'm an immigrant, but I came when I was little, but my parents who are first generation, they're not thinking about, oh my gosh, Asian American rights, right? I remember even going canvassing it was Orange County was starting to turn blue. And I was like, send me to the Asian community, send me there. Because, maybe if they see someone that looks like them talking about issues, but for them, for the kind of middle, it was Brea, California, upper middle class Asian Americans, they care about affirmative action because that's the wedge issue for Asian Americans, right? We know this because, there's all those lawsuits in Harvard and using Asian, like a small group of Asian Americans, even though majority of Asian Americans, especially second generation, support affirmative action. But that's the wedge issue in that immigrant community. It was like everywhere I knocked on the door, they were like, but affirmative action, right? And so this was, a non-religious, probably non-religious community. So the conservative right has really used these wedge issues to kind of drive immigrants to vote really against their general interest based on one small wedge issue. And they're so clever because everything's so simplified and black and white for them. Whereas life as we know, is very complicated. And it's like the left is always trying to we're trying to explain things and it's really hard to explain things, and people want simple answers. So I feel like, can the Christian left mobilize and kind of use morality in a way that is, that will tug at hearts, right? And I think this book tries to get at that.
You really open up for my next question. I do want to say that this story made me think about my dad who came to the United States undocumented in the 1930s. Got naturalized during World War II when he was given a choice between being deported or joining the U.S. Army, and who voted for both Ronald Reagan and Jesse Jackson, and his last vote was for Barack Obama. And I still remember that vote because I was on the phone with my son and my dad trying to like push my dad in the Obama direction. But you really lifted up something I want to get to. You can tell that I'm not here to ask all the cheery questions, which is, where are we coming up short? I mean, if you think about this set of issues that's got 70% of people aligned, almost everybody knows that the ultimate solution is essentially what Kennedy and McCain proposed. It just keeps coming up over and over again, which is legalize people who are here, come up with some method of securing the border because people legitimately have concerns about that, and create paths for much more legal immigration because apparently the economy can absorb folks and needs them, and it's a contributor, right? It's like so obvious, as is a bunch of other stuff. And yet we continually come up short. When you think about this crisis of multiracial democracy, the huge inequality, the fact that Trump has even got the possibility of winning is, you can point the finger at a lot of different people, but what I'd like to do is to look in the mirror and say, where is it that we're coming up short? You started to talk about something about how progressives wind up explaining rather than touching hearts. But in this moment of crisis, what does the book tell us about where we're coming up short and what we need to do?
Gosh, that's such a hard question.
See, now you're no longer glad you invited me.
Well, I think about, what is it what did Martin Luther King, how did he mobilize so many people across faith, across race? What is it? I mean, I feel like it can't, morality. I mean, I felt like growing up, morality it was always the Republicans invoking morality, right? And I do think that Obama actually invoked hope and morality. And things have to be very simple, but immigration is very complex, right? And even though what you just said, hello, the solution is actually very simple, it's because there's the kind of vilification of immigrants that has been such a successful campaign on the right. I think about Katie Britt's like response, it was a bunch of lies, right, and exaggerations. But I knew so many people would be convinced by that. People, I think SNL like parodied it because it seemed so silly, but I was so afraid, and I thought I can never be in a room with her. I would be afraid for my life, because she sees people like me as inhuman. Like there's like no humanity, and this kind of like, let's protect our daughters from the immigrants. It's like, I study Hollywood, and Birth of a Nation was a very, very successful film because they used the rape trope. There was like blackface. It was just like, that was a lie too, right? That was literally a fiction film, but it created the KKK as heroic. And I feel like that is what the Republican Party has done successfully. The immigrant as this raping, horrible criminal. And so how do we change that image, right? I think there has to be a media campaign of changing that image, right? And I think that the stories that we tell are, let someone out there make a documentary or make a fictional narrative film, put the Hollywood money behind it. But like there has to be a counter campaign, not vilifying the immigrant, but showing the humanity of immigrants. And stories of how immigrants, there's so many stories of how immigrants have contributed to this society. This is a society of immigrants. Donald Trump's families, are immigrants, right? And so I think obviously I talked about white supremacy, this kind of lie also of somehow like white folks aren't immigrants and only people of color are immigrants. Yeah, we have to change hearts and minds through representation, I think, because people, even my own children can't sit down and read an article. They're watching TikToks, right? But Gen Z is creating TikToks. We can create short films. But they need to be very, very inviting. It can't be from academics. I'm sorry. Even this whole thing, we need little like sound bites, right? Because that's the youth. But I do think that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as we know, is the first predominantly non-white generation. And I feel like Gen Z, there's hope, So I think let's not lose hope. It's not over. We haven't lost yet. But I do think, there has to be a huge campaign using the humanity, the stories that we've presented, giving humanity to the immigrant that has been vilified.
Thanks for that, and thanks for not presenting it in a Katie Brett breathless kind of way. I can't believe. Alexia,
Maybe I need to do that, right?
it didn't work for her. I know you're sort of jumping at this question
I'm jumping at this question.
about how are we, what's the mirror we need to look at?
Yeah.
And what is it that we need to be doing differently?
So we talk in organizing about the air campaign and the ground campaign. And I have great respect for people who lean towards the air campaign. I don't think it's unimportant, but personally, I'm almost completely uninterested in it. I'm interested in the ground campaign. And this is going to be a little ironic because they're sociologists and I'm a missiologist, but I'm going to talk about sociology. I'm going to talk about intergroup contact theory, right? 1954, it's really been around a long time. And it's been debunked quite a bit, saying, no, relationship doesn't change people. But of course, even if we go back to Gordon Allport, it's not that relationship changes people, it's that certain kinds of relationship change people. So in the faith community, we have the option to come together in joint mission, which creates a peer relationship. So when we went to visit the kids in the detention center and did vacation Bible school and baking and football, it wasn't the relationship with the kids that changed people. It was the peer relationship between the people that went there together that changed them. So we have to create peer relationships across this divide. Now, the only way to do this is not to see the other as somehow good when you've been used to seeing them as evil. We need a hefty dose of grace. We are in a very graceless moment. We are at war, and people at war have no grace. But in fact, all of us screw up. That's real. And if you try to build relationship based on, I'm going to try to see you as good, even though I really think you're evil. And then you do something wrong or you say something wrong, that's done. Unless you have this faith concept of grace, which is that we all screw up and you are going to do the wrong thing and you are going to say the wrong thing, and me too. But we're going to come together and we go back to bridging. We're going to come together on common sacred ground, on that which we all care about together. That's deep work. It's slow work. It's hard work. I realized, I went back to the book and realized that Brad didn't use my name, but referred to something I say all the time, which is I feel like Moses looking into the promised land, and I know I won't get there. But I know that my children and grandchildren have a good chance of getting there. And that's how we have to see things, and that is a religious perspective, is to see things in centuries and not in years, is to say that we need to this long, deep, hard work of building relationships on common sacred ground across our divides that are fueled and supported by a hefty dose of grace. Because it's in those relationships, when we're peers engaged in something that we all care about, that we're transformed. And I have had the great privilege of seeing many transformations in my life. We have to take it up to scale. That does mean that we have to work with the air campaign and the ground campaign together, much more than we tend to. Usually the air people go do their thing and the ground people go do their thing. But also that we just have to invest in long-term deep work. And that's not where the left tends to go. You know, we had this fight on the National Immigration Forum. We had this fight all the time. Like, don't just get the pastors, go into the congregations. We know how to do this. But it takes too much time and too much investment, and we don't want to. But there is no alternative at this point in history to that deep work.
I think another part that we'll hopefully explore in Q&A is the relationship to other parts of the movement that are not faith-based and what it is to make that happen. But we're going to break for Q&A. But Brad, do you want to say anything about looking in the mirror and seeing, I'm sure, just a really handsome guy? Aside from that, what do you think comes up short?
Yeah, it's hard to follow what Nancy and Alexia said because it's so powerful. But I guess I'll just tell my own story real quick. That, you know, I was at one point sort of a Christian right person, and so I guess what doesn't convince people is statistics. And, you know, I'm a sociologist, and a quantitative sociologist. So I went, like, look at the statistics. We need 2 million people, immigrants in this country, just to stop our population from declining. But I say that to my classes all the time, and it doesn't convince anybody, because these narratives.
You're really crushing me right now.
But I actually had Pastor Carlos Rincon, who's right here, come and speak to my class, and he told his life story. And that's what moved my students, his story, and the fact that he was a pastor, and I teach at a Christian university, and just he was super open about his life. That's what changes people. And I think maybe we become too intellectualized, where we think, and I'm, you know, because I'm a sociologist, that's where I go, is I can convince people just through reason. But like Nancy was saying, it's the stories, and like Alexia was saying, it's deep connection with people. And I'll just say, with me, like, I learned a lot of sociological theories in grad school, but my life really didn't change in terms of understanding racism until and the way that people experience racism until I actually, ironically, got to Biola and was teaching about it and not understanding it very well. But when I became in deep relationship with people who are experiencing it on a daily basis. And so I think a combination of the stories and getting the stories out and that deep relationship is really the only way that social change happens, real deep social change happens.
Great. I know we want to open it up to questions that might be in the audience or questions apparently on.
Yeah, I have one
Facebook.
from online, which we'll save to the end because it's the story question. Story answer to the question. I just want to mention a couple things based on, I have a lot of notes. But, so Alexia's opening story and yours, I think your opening comments, that little graphic behind you says engage spirituality. Maybe it was Nancy who said about faith as a motivator and a sustainer in this kind of work. Get on our website, look up engage spirituality. There's 101 stories of around the world, people of different faith traditions, no faith traditions, some broad spirituality that's driving them to do these kinds of things in the world. They're not all immigration activists or anything like that, but it's at this question of the role that faith broadly plays in their lives as a motivator, but also like how it keeps them going over time and dark, the shadow side of all that. The other thing is that there's actually a chapter in the book called Accompaniment, and I like that idea. There's a pastor I've followed for like 20 years. I first met him at an event in Orange County. Now he's in Portland. He had this really unique church in Ventura where their mission was to take their church into the city, to work with, to be a presence in the city. And he's the only pastor I know who literally told me, we realized that we had done everything God called us to do, so we decided to put the church to death. Church went out. And they all went off with the other things, which is kind of gutsy. But the church he has now, it's in Portland, and it's called the Alongsiders Chapel, I think. It's the Alongsiders. And that comes from his observation. Literally, we were up there a few years ago talking with him. It was pouring rain in Seattle, or in Portland, shocker. And he looks over to the right, he's at a stoplight, sees a woman and a man at a bus stop. Man has an umbrella, a woman doesn't. He just moves over and puts the woman under. And it clicks him in his head about that's what we need to do as a church, is to come alongside people in our community and walk with them as they go through life. And I think that's just a powerful kind of image to me. And it's interesting that you have this accompaniment, emotion in there as well. So let's start with comments, questions here, and then I'll save the one for the last. Anybody? Oh, I knew it. You go first.
My curiosity is around what it takes to move with movements. So, Manuel, Alexia, you've been deep in movement spaces for a long time in LA. But my question is also around the recent transition of Matthew 25, the past couple months, which Brad and Nancy were part of. And my question comes from the massive change we're seeing on the political landscape, the way that our religious landscape is changing so much, but also seeing the way movement organizations are also shifting leadership a lot right now as well. So I think in the room we have a lot of generations just thinking about what does it take as movement people to allow our organizations and ourselves to change as the political landscape is changing? And even as we might see organizations maybe closing or shifting, to not see that as a sign of hope, but see it as something, we're becoming something else. What does it take to be people who allow for those sorts of changes?
My favorite title is not Reverend or Doctor. It's a title that I was given by the young people that I work with, which is Madrina, which means godmother, which for those of you who are not from a Latina tradition, it's not like just in the larger dominant culture like a godparent. It's more like the movie The Godfather, only we don't kill people. But that level of fierce, right? So I'm very honored by that title. But I think I raised that because I want to say that I think that it's very hard for people from my generation to pass the torch. I just want to fess up, that we were the generation that said, don't trust anyone over 30. And
Except us.
Except us, right? Except us. And so there's this sense that we've wanted to hold on to our image of ourselves as the vanguard. And, that means that there's a disconnect between the younger generations coming up and the history that we carry that's often there. And I think that it's really important to heal that. I'm just saying that. What would you all say?
Well, after I sort of critiqued academic sociology. I think academic sociology has something to say here, and that organizations have a life cycle, and also organizations tend not to be very good at adapting to changes happening, but organizations aren't living beings, right? And so we just need to be willing to let organizations go, and the movement's never going to stop, but the structure of organizations within it, they come and go, and we need to be free to just let them go.
You made the same people coming and going anyhow.
Yeah.
So if I could add one thing to that, Vanessa knows this well because she was part of the writing of this book, State of Resistance. And there's only 2 songs that are quoted in it. One is by Gil Scott-Heron, which is "There's no such thing as a Superman," which is that we're often looking for that single heroic leader to take us forward. And the song basically says that, you will make change once you realize there's no such thing as a Superman. And the second, oddly enough, is Bob Dylan. Maybe not that odd, but the line, "I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now." And I think that part of this too, how does over leadership not just step out of the way, but renew itself and become younger? Meaning understanding what the anger is for this Gen Z and millennial generation that's been handed a complete and utter mess economically, socially, racially, in terms of the climate. And understanding the biggest thing I know that we've been paying attention to within our work with movements is this balance between internal healing and external effectiveness. Because an older generation, our generation was like, just burn your way through it, man, like it's tough, but we got to get going. And that's really destructive. And it also is not inviting and opening to people who need to come in. So figuring that out and how to learn from young people, I think is really crucial.
I'm happy that you mentioned Gil Scott-Heron. I was able to introduce Gil Scott-Heron to a young man who was talking to me about rap. I'm like, "You ever heard of Gil Scott-Heron?" No, I said, "It's not exactly rap."
Dude, it's totally rap. Isn't
I
it?
know, oh, exactly. And so I had my phone, it was in a cab, and I played it, and was just like, oh, and I'm sorry, but I didn't say this to you, but please say who you are.
Oh.
So this is Vanessa
Yeah,
from.
the Equity Research Institute.
Renee Molina, I represent a couple, executive director, pastor of Harley and Christian Adams, also a professor at Vanguard University. And my research is in organizational psychology in the social sector. And so I feel like the first question you guys just like opened it up for, like, that's kind of my research, is the effectiveness in social organizations. But that's not my question. I'm an optimist, and I do think I'm pretty hopeful that we're in a time to redefine faith and spirituality. And if we are to continue redefining faith and spirituality, what advice do you have to continue that redefining the faith and spirituality? It just seems that we're seeing already numbers in Florida, right? People are kind of just tired of the whole culture war, and so it just seems like people are starting to, at least from my perspective, like hopefully we're shifting to something, and so there's an opportunity to redefine what faith is. What does a faith community do? What does a church do? What is a church? What's a church post-COVID? All these questions of it seems like an identity crisis. There's almost a redefining happening. And so my question to you is, it seems like such a sacred and terrible task to redefine. And so what should we do as we're kind of redefining faith and its impact with society?
So I have a very paradoxical answer, if I can start. My paradoxical answer is go back to history. And so let me explain that. I wrote Buried Seeds with Brandon Rencher, who wrote about the independent churches of enslaved people. And I wrote about the base Christian community movement in Latin America and the Philippines. Because these were historical movements that were the church that the young people that I talk to want, that they want in their hearts, that the elements they want to see in a church. It's not like that's never happened. It's happened around the world and in certain places and in certain times. And there's a way in which the more that you see, and this is what academics bring, right, at our best, is we offer the opportunity to back up and look at this big picture and to bring it into the current moment. But when you see it in all these different incarnations, all these different wineskins, then you begin to be encouraged that this is something we can do in another wineskin, in a new way, because we sort of see the pure wine through all these different wineskins. I feel like a new kind of human being is happening around the interaction between online and offline. And y'all gonna figure out how to be in community as those new kinds of human beings that you are. No way I'm gonna know that. But you'll be able to see that it's not so different from how people have been around the world and throughout the ages at our best moments, at our purest, most beautiful, most powerful. And you would know that with movements. You know, I know that with churches, but you would know that when the shining moments for movements, that you can go around the world and throughout time and you can see that there's something in common between all those shining movements that gives you some vision. It's my 2 cents on it.
I have an online question. It's an easy one. It's not a story question. Is the book available in Spanish?
No, but it should be. Yeah. I wish it was. We should work on that.
Yeah. Yes, you should.
You know what, if not the book, we do this, I'm sure you'll do it too, where we'll write a synopsis and you can make it available online in Spanish.
All right. Other questions? Rich, and then
Rich Wood, USC Institute for Advanced Catholic Study. So I spent my whole career as a person of faith in secular institutions. And listening to you, I'm really struck. I haven't read the book yet, but I'm going to because in listening to you, the sort of gentleness in all three of you, the compassion behind what you say, the commitment there. Those aren't words I use about my secular institution. Not much gentleness, certainly. There's a kind of compassion, but it's often said an ideologically framed compassion. Lots of commitment, but it doesn't come across with the sort of gentleness that you all love. What do you think makes the difference? Is that a product of being in faith-based institutions? Is that a product of your own sort of spirituality linked to your intellectual work? And what would you suggest to secular settings about that?
I'll start. So I went to UCLA in grad school, and oh my God, it was like not gentle. And I think I swore to myself that I would not become that kind of academic. So, I mean, I was a person of faith there as well. And I mean, academia, like, I think what Manuel said, like, you know, arguing against, it's like you can only be respected if you can tear some other theory or professor or school down, right? School of thought down. And not that there wasn't that kind of stuff in Christian universities. They do it based on, like, you sociologists are not doing gospel work. So I got a lot of that in a different way. And I mean, that's why I left, actually. I left because I was being tortured in an ideological way, right? So it's like academics they just torture people, right? So I think we are drawn to one another, right? As faithful academics, because I think we have that shared commonality of wanting to bring compassion to our teaching, to our research. So I think it's a selection of folks. I don't think we can speak on behalf of all Christian academics because they are not gentle, especially if they are, it's just so ideologically driven. Because I think also as sociologists, I think, at least maybe I can speak for Brad and myself, that, we're looking at, like, I want to feel like, again, respecting members' meanings, right? I want to understand how communities function, and I want to come at it from a humble place, Not that all ethnographers do that either, but the purest ethnographers we're supposed to, be very self-reflexive and think about power dynamics and come in really with empathy and understanding, right? So I think I try to draw the best of my sociological training with all the torture that I face in academia, whether secular or religious, and just try to do the best I can. And especially I'm interested in public scholarship and really being able to share our knowledge with a general public and not just keep it, because that's also another kind of form of pride, right? That we can speak in a way that nobody understands, and that somehow that makes us smarter. So, yeah.
Can I add to that? Because of the one person on the panel who is not faith-based, I guess I have some kind of faith, but is that I think that for me, I hope I was equally gentle. Although I did ask some of these tough questions about where are we coming up from, stuff like that. But I think for me, what that comes from is deep work with movements, because, and in particular, the disjuncture between social movement theory and sociology, which I think is generally pretty useless. And then when you come with a theoretical self-consciousness of people who are actually making movements and understand their brilliance, then the idea of not awarding that's a brilliant thing about this book, is that the organizers are speaking for themselves. It's not just this top-down kind of, well, I've got a theory and I'm trying to fit you into it, but what's bubbling up ethnographically from Alexia's experience, it's talked about quite a bit, from others' experience. And I think that one of the things that might help us be more humane in the university, Rich, is to have more people be engaged with communities and learn a lot more about community organizing. One of the things I've learned about working with community organizers, and having done a little bit of it part-time years ago, so not to claim to be a community organizer, is if you treat people terribly, they're probably not going to be with you. And that, I don't know why that does not translate into the academy, where the idea is that if you really are abusive, that you will somehow attract people like stars to you, that really is not going to work. And your soul will not be something you can live with later on.
We're going to have a question back here, but this is a sociology question since we're on the academy. Brad, I'm assigning this to you. What do you mean by let the organization go?
Yeah, I mean, let it die. Let it, because, there's this, I was influenced by this theory in grad school called population ecology theory. And basically the idea is that organizations are kind of like, it's kind of an evolutionary theory of organizations, but when the environment changes, organizations usually don't adapt to that, but they usually die, and then a more adaptive organization thrives in that environment. And so I've always thought of that and as being true, because I've seen it. We see it in religion in this country right now. These institutions are dying. Something new needs to happen, and all these organizations are trying to, okay, how do we adapt? How do we adapt? Well, maybe it's not possible. Let a new generation or a new set of organizations fill the gap. So that's what I meant.
And there's a possibility. I mean, this is what we tried to do with Matthew 25. Got Carlos and friends are all taking it over from here, but is that you have to die well if you want to have your death be seeds of new life. And I think there's a certain amount of humility in that unfortunately people don't necessarily always have.
The pastor I mentioned to you, when he said that they put their church to death, it wasn't overnight, it was a year-long process. That they worked through it together with the community and on and on. And it wasn't that they weren't committed to being in the faith world anymore. It was like in that expression, they were finished and they were going to find a new expression. And now they've gone to different sort of places. And that's hard to do, but it is probably, I think, this is my own perspective when we talk. We work a lot with faith leaders, and we're not encouraging them to kill their churches, but we are encouraging them to think of them as in an organizational way, that it has its own demands, but there's other opportunities for it. You can do different kinds of things either within it or separate from it or related to it, and just think more broadly about how they go about doing stuff.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Religion department here at USC. And I do want to let you know that some of us were so shocked by the Trump election that we didn't write books, but we decided to get PhDs in religion instead. So many paths. I have two questions. I think they're both quick answers, or maybe no answer at all. But a few of you brought up asylum seekers and refugees. So I'm curious, in your talks in faith communities, have you seen a different rhetoric surrounding Ukraine as opposed to what's happening in South America? And then second question real quick is, we know that Gen Z, and they're mostly my students, are the largest group of the nuns that we have ever seen in this country. At the same time, men under 30 are swinging wildly conservative and right. We saw what happened at UVA, Jews will not replace us, things like that. So how do you think we attack the idea of anti-immigrants among a generation that is largely unaffiliated, if like we're trying to organize for faith-based communities?
Way to throw an easy question.
Great question. Well, I would just say that I guess the best critique of the bad is the practice of the good. So there's still faith communities there, and then ones that are doing good work, sort of getting behind those and building from what's there rather than trying to build from what's not there. Because we don't know like how this is all going to shake out. And I don't think what's interesting about the data about people leaving religion is not that they're leaving ideas about the ultimate or God or spirituality. That hasn't really dropped. It's institutions and affiliating with organized religions. And so I think building organizations or communities, and I actually like the word communities better, building communities that's doing the work of love and justice is how things change. And that can be done in all kinds of different organizational settings. So yeah.
There are also a number of people, again, I can only speak for the Latino community here. I don't know what other communities are doing, but there are a number of people right now who are young Christians who are intentionally working outside of churches, that are working in these sort of mixed communities like the Puentes. It's this network of people that include people that are active Christians and people who aren't sure what they believe, working together around healing and positive social change. And I heard this wild story from my daughter this morning about somebody who's been reaching out to people their age who are right-wing to have conversations, that they see that as part of their mission, but that they could carry out that mission better because they're part of the Puentes, they're not part of a church. So I think there are these new formulations. My hope would be that people in the church community can be supportive of these new formulations and stay in relationship with them, rather than critique them or judge them, because they're trying to find their way, right? And far be it from me to know what God is doing in the next generation. But we should have a fundamental sort of support for it and try to hold it accountable in some way so it doesn't just become loose and fall apart.
Okay, last question. With all that's still occurring, what is your hope or prayer? What is the hope or prayer you have for faith-based organizations and churches as they continue to move forward in the movement?
That's such a good question. Was that the one online? That was the story? Yeah.
All right, all you thinking, I would like to answer that question. So on the organizational questions, the church, in my view, and this is where it gets me in trouble, but I don't think church, as we understand it, is the only option for church. There's a group we came across on a project we had a few years ago They were kind of an experimental funded Episcopal church in Orange County. And they quickly decided, they were very small, they quickly decided they didn't like the churchy stuff. They didn't like to have some get together with music. They didn't want to have to preach. So what they ended up doing was service. They started a laundry love group. And when I talked to the leader and his wife about it, well, they were both leaders, they're like, yeah, we didn't like that stuff. Our worship is service. But that goes against the grain of how people think about this. I've used them as an example in a talk I gave, and a reporter there, who I think was faith affiliated, essentially got mad at me because it wrote it up, and I didn't ever say anything. That, well, where's the worship? I'm like, you weren't paying attention. They said the worship was in the service. It's when what they're doing is they're living out their faith on a daily basis. So it's like church can look different ways. I don't think you have to have, so I think that's an option. I'm not saying that. So this question, any hope or prayer for the future?
Well, if I can just quickly say, let's not lose hope. Let's not despair, because I think it's really easy to despair. And of just everything going on in the world right now. And for me, I really struggle with that. And for me, it's hope is on the ground. So the more you engage in what's going on the ground, the more hope you have. And so that's what I would say, because man, there's a lot of great things happening, but they just don't show up on your phone or on your news feed.
And boy, Brad, that's just so important, because so often upper middle class white atheists in the left would say to me, Christianity is just an outrage because you're saying that God is with people who are experiencing this terrible injustice. Like, how can you say that? What an outrage. But if you talk to people on the ground they're the people with the most faith. The people who are experiencing have this vibrant hope for themselves, and sometimes much broader than that. So I feel like it's because it's because that's where you meet Jesus. I'm sorry, I'm just going to be really honest. That's where you meet Jesus. You meet Jesus in imitating him and being with other people who are doing the same, being in communities of solidarity like that. And it gives you, then you experience it, and that experience gives you hope. So I have great respect for people who do this without the experience, who stay in the thought world where they're continuing to do the AIR campaign or continuing to be academics and to push for things that matter for people on the ground when you don't have the daily experience of the presence of God. I don't know that I could do it. And it's hard. And one of the challenges of being an academic now, I'm sort of getting used to the fact that is sort of what I am now. But being an academic is, how do I make sure there's enough of this in my life? How do I make sure that I find ways to be in the church, to be in the movement, so that I'm nurtured by that daily experience?
All right, on that note, before we leave, I want to recognize anything we do at CRCC is a full-on, all-hands-on-deck team event. And if you turn around, you'll see our staff and 1 or 2 students that work for us. Everything we do, everybody chips in and does their thing. I had to chip in from the June today because she's not here to do all the sort of normal stuff. So she's better. So thank you all. Appreciate you coming online and in person. And that is it for today.